Phoebe, your turn, in that we know that slowly but surely the preventative aspects of health have gradually got more attention, perhaps not more as much attention as those of us who advocate in that area might want, but slowly but surely those issues are being recognised more broadly. We were just speaking earlier about how our own career trajectories are being very much influenced by being at the eye of the storm in this country around HIV prevention and education through the 1990s. In your own experience, beyond Australia, of course, internationally, what extent is human rights in particular and your role now been an impact on health, and how much is that, again, playing out in your experience in the developing world?
Human rights, in terms of its relationship to health and the promotion of health, is a mixed bag. It's not at all straightforward as one might think. But the big lesson that I draw from it for global health is there are two words that are used around human rights. One is interdependence and the other is indivisibility. And what that says to me is that it's not the 3 Millennium Goals that are relevant to health, but it's all 8 of them. And that issues of governance, that's governance in terms of global health, but also national governance, provincial governance and local governance are crucial to the delivery of health services, and the accountability and transparency of those forms of governance is equally crucial, because if you have, as we're seeing at the moment, global funds trying to distribute their aid and then being criticised because of corrupt distribution of that aid at a national level, making donors less likely to contribute to those funds, and then those funds being less able to distribute more broadly, then all of those issues have to be dealt with. When I was approached to speak tonight, it's just one of those areas that it's almost ridiculous in its breadth, because one has to attend to so many issues, so that there's the issue of local delivery of services, but there are then the issues of global coordination of aid, and how does that relate to governance and priority setting within countries when those countries' governments just don't work. And I'm not talking about failed states, but governance in countries that have very limited resources, so that to try and photocopy something is a great challenge. So for me, I think of this in 2 ways. I think about the infrastructure that's necessary to support whatever services might be available, but then there are also local social and cultural issues, and then of course there is distribution of scarce resources. You know, we can, if Kennedy had decided that his aim was going to be to provide sanitation on Earth, that I think would have been a challenge that was worthy of an American president, and probably more worthy than putting somebody on the moon.
Thanks, Bibi. And you've made mention of the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs as they're acronym, as did Tim. And I just wanted to take the discussion back there and allow for a degree of interactivity on that basis to start with, though. Tim, I must maybe put it back to you in that, cut to the chase. There's a broad question about the effectiveness of the Millennium Development Goals, but I particularly wanted to ask you whether my own interest in one of the hats that we didn't introduce you with at the start, which is your patronage of the emerging Australian National Development Index, an attempt to create a series of wellbeing measures and progress measures for the country that is an umbrella project within happening across the OECD for several years now, measuring the progress of societies. Does the issue of targets help or hinder in this respect of real targets, that is, targets beyond goals, and the way that they may or may not be enforced?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the inadequacies of the Millennium Development Goals and why they're patchy within countries, and why you're measuring often like flying at 50,000 feet, and when you come down you actually see all sorts of unevenness. However, as I said in my introduction, when you're living in a world where essentially discussion about aid and poverty in any domestic situation is really just the scraps of interest. I can tell you, trying to get an article in a paper, impossible to get it in the Australian for a start, but getting an article in a paper about poverty and aid, unless it's corruption and it's their fault, just, give it away. So for domestic countries to actually sign up to Millennium Development Goals, imperfect as they are, I think we have to say is an extraordinary achievement. Your question about our work trying to work on a National Development Index, an idea that came up at the now almost laughable 2020 summit. You feel like embarrassed to admit you're even there. But one of the ideas that did come up within our track was around a different index to simply GDP. So we know that GDP as a measure of economics is highly inadequate. We know, thanks to books like Wilkinson and Pickett's, and they're epidemiologists, not social scientists, a book called The Spirit Level, Why Equality Matters. They map all the OECD countries and the 50 states of America internally on their equality. And they say those countries, and it's true of states within America, where there is far greater inequality, so if you like, the top 20% have 15 to 20 times more than the bottom 20% compared to the Scandinavians, Japan, where it's 4 times more the top 20% have to the bottom. Every indicator, from even how long you live, to mental illness, to violence, to imprisonment, is actually profoundly distorted. Those unequal countries hurt even their rich. It's a very interesting, fascinating thesis. It's not an old class thesis. It's saying even the rich in those countries living in gated communities don't live as long as the rich in other more equal societies. So our National Development Index, or Amartya Sen, who really came up with the Human Development Index, which was a measure of saying the things that matter most are a sense of crime levels and pollution levels, and community connection is fundamental for health. And inequality blows it out, and GDP can say, well, under John Howard, and this was right, even the poor in Australia did better. So no one can complain. What we know is that the rich did far, far better, and the inequality grew so much more, and Australia's not doing terribly well on the spirit level. That inequality, because poverty is always relative, affects health and affects how we think about ourselves in trust and community and social capital. Our National Development Index is having a go at those sort of things, with the Bureau of Statistics being involved. But take out MDGs, far from perfect, but they were still an extraordinary achievement because they have galvanised the world's mind. And each year at the United Nations there is at least a scorecard, and there's measures, and there's traction, and it gives those of us in Make Poverty history something to organise around. because we can hold up the scorecard. Final comment on this, it's been one of the reasons we have got bipartisan support for Australia's shameful performance in terms of our levels of overseas aid to actually hold up the mirror. So here are the British under a Tory Prime Minister, already at 0.5, 50 cents in every $100, legislated within 2 years to be at 0.7, slashing and burning their budget because they've been really hit by the global financial crisis, and a Tory Prime Minister says, we aren't cutting aid, already at 0.5. And we're not compromising our promises to the world's poor under the MDGs. Amazing. This is not a left or right issue, a Tory Prime Minister. In Australia, we're at 33 cents. We escaped the global financial crisis. We're in the region where most of the world's poor, and those countries buy our goods because we're just a giant quarry, and we sell it to these countries and they keep us out of economic trouble. So the fact that we are so far behind the MDGs and our promise to get to 0.7 gives us leverage, an argument. That's one of the great things around them.
Do you want to take up the running there at all, Baby?
Just a comment, if I may, is that the British government also quarantined medical research cuts.
Yep. We better all move to Britain.